Welcome back as we continue to bring you this live 24-hour coverage of the sixth election, the sixth democratic election here in South Africa. A lot of excited people about yesterday. I must say it was a beautiful atmosphere in South Africa with people coming around showing off their thumbs. My gosh, I think I got one of the biggest lines you could ever find. I don't know if you want to zoom into that one. This is a long stripe that I'm using and keeping on with pride. Even though some people complaining that they were able to rub theirs off. I haven't tried to rub mine off, I have to say, but nonetheless, there's mine all the way down my thumb, and I love it. It was a great feeling. There was a great atmosphere among South Africans going out and sharing their vote. I was concerned, however, when I did go shopping, and I did see a lot of people still at work not having cast their vote, but they promised me they were getting off at 6 o'clock and they were going straight to the polling station. So I do hope you got a chance to vote, because that would be very, very unfair if you didn't. But nonetheless, you still had a couple of hours to get there. So give us your story. How did it go for you yesterday, and were you able to do it? Okay, Susan Booysen is in studio with us now. She's here to try and analyze these early results. I actually read a very funny tweet from Eusebius Makaiser, who was saying, you're going to hear every single anchor saying, we cannot at this early stage predict. These are our predictions. It's still early days, remember? And we keep on having to emphasize that, because it is still early days.
Yes, it is very early. We know that SABC team with some experts are working on doing some projections a little bit further down the line, not quite yet, but it is early. But we see obviously the ANC being in a dominant position, and so far it seems the ANC will be able to sustain its support above that 50% level, which some opinion polls had even doubted. Wow. The DA is coming through at this early stage, second place, and the EFF in that third place. Not spectacular, it seems, at this stage, but a solid third place. And then we are really watching those small political parties, because we know up to 10% of the national vote is likely to be going to the shown the results to have gone to the small parties.
The smaller parties,
and which ones then? So far, the Freedom Front seems to be standing on a solid percentage. Good seems to be coming through, and then we will we'll have to differentiate which of the smaller parties are only going to get into the provincial legislatures, and which ones actually into national parliament. And as we know, small parties can make an interesting difference.
I mean, when we look at what the results that we have on hand right now. I think we can put up a graphic of where we're at so far, but this was maybe a couple of minutes ago. More than 3,100 voting districts have been declared. I mean, we've got to keep on saying that there are 23,000 voting districts in South Africa. So, we've got a long way to go. So, Susan, I want to just see, maybe you can have a look at this at the screen there of the national results. This is from the IEC, so these aren't predictions, these are actual votes. We can see the IFP sitting at 30,616, and then we'll slowly pan down and have a look at other parties that jump out. The NFP, 3,100 is what they're sitting at, and we'll keep on panning a little bit lower. ANC, 1 million. They've gone over 1 million at this point of the votes, 1,038,000. BLF, 1,120. So that's where they're sitting right now. Please shout in when you also one jumps out at you. There's the DA, 529,000 votes, 674. And the Freedom Front Plus, 69,623. Early days, but what are you making of these votes so far?
It's interesting, the hierarchy that is emerging between the small parties. Compare that to ones you've just mentioned, for example, with COPE, that is only coming out on 7,700 and something at this stage.
And look at the EFF, 150,966. Is this going to be, I do say it sort of, in a way that is a bit harsh, and there's the Good Party at 16,655. You mentioned COPE is at 7,711.
Probably off the representation list in Parliament.
There you go. And I mean, this is a worrying sign already for the parties like COPE. There's the UDM at 8,888. I mean, what's going to happen to these parties? I mean, do we see them falling off the radar?
Several of them, yes. And the difference between those established parties, smaller ones that have been in Parliament, cope from a decade ago when they just launched 8% of the national vote and then going down. Subsequently, very likely to fall off the representation radar in Parliament. And then these new small parties, 2 or 3 or 5, I think it seems like good, maybe breaking through into parliamentary representation. And the ATM, it seems, could be there in Parliament.
Yeah.
So many of these small ones are just totally obscure parties. Like yesterday at the IEC Centre in Pretoria, one walks amongst these little tables where all the political parties are sitting, each one has their little desk, and sometimes one has to do a double take. Well, on earth are these people again? Some are even saying, but we are not actually a political party, we're a small protest movement. But they had enough money to pay the deposit and participate in this election.
Yeah.
And I spoke to a few IEC people, and they are all very concerned about this. It's almost not their word, but almost a circus of new small political parties or people who call themselves political parties who have enough money to pay the deposit.
And let's talk to that deposit, because for people that don't know, the numbers are quite interesting. If you want to participate in the general elections, the national elections, that's 200,000 Rand. That's what you need to pay.
Yes.
For every province that you participate in, we're looking at 45,000 Rand.
Yes.
That's what you have to apply per province. So you going and you are participating in all of their provinces and the national election, and you're looking at about 600,000 Rand.
Exactly.
It's a lot of money.
And there seems to be lots of people with deep pockets who don't mind.
Great funders. Really strong funders out there.
Because those deposits, if they do not get that roughly 0.25, a quarter of 1% of the national vote, they will not be in Parliament. Sometimes on that residual vote, they can get in on a slightly lower, like ABC, for example, had come in on 0.17% of the national vote 5 years ago. And so slight variations there, but many of the IEC coffers will be well bolstered with all of these deposits.
I've got an update on some of the election statistics right now. We're almost at 2 million votes counted, and it's looking quite good. At this point, we're sitting at 25,686 spoiled votes. What does that talk to? For you, what does it... I mean, I know that there was a picture doing the rounds on social media. I mean, you shouldn't be taking pictures of your paper. That was one of the rules that was not allowed.
South African culture.
Exactly. I think that there was one voting page that had "I love you" written next to its political party. Now, that surely is not a vote. That's considered a spoiled vote, right?
That would be a spoiled vote.
Okay.
Definitely.
So, I mean, 25,000, almost 26,000 spoiled votes, spoiled ballots.
You know, it is relatively high, there could be more of a political statement, but next best option to abstaining from the vote or voting for an obscure small party on whom you possibly can waste your vote because they will not make it into Parliament, and that vote will actually be allocated to somebody you had not voted for. So perhaps spoiled ballots, and it will be fascinating to see the final tallies and how those compare with previous years. It's certainly one of the spaces I'm watching, whether that is a type of protest vote, people feeling, I want to participate, I've fought for this vote, but honestly, which political party really deserves that individual vote?
Or I love you, but I cannot vote for you.
Yes.
You vote me too much.
Maybe
I still
that
love
was
you.
after Muse Maimane had said in his speech on Saturday, he's not asking people to marry them.
Oh, yes,
just
exactly.
to vote for
Well,
them.
if you're not asking me to marry you, then no, it's over. Our relationship's done. But, you know, we're looking here at a voter turnout, because that's also a big one. And people were very concerned that the voter turnout would drop below 60%. Whereas in South Africa, we've always been actually not drop below 60, drop below 70, because we as a country have always been very good with our election turnout, over 70%.
Yes.
Right now, it's sitting at 64% turnout. But still, again, I use that line, early days. We're going to constantly be saying that.
Yes.
But that's where we're at right now. What are your sort of thoughts and predictions of turnout?
Yes, our previous lowest one, the previous election, was 73.5%.
Yeah.
And so there is no doubt that it will be below that. I know people have been doing polls suggested that it could be around 70%. The current early indications are that it's well below that 70%, and that it would actually be interesting if at all it reaches the 65% turnout. And that is still high by international standards, yes, but that will also be a strong political statement, because we know from our research and just interviews, many people are saying they just cannot make up their minds. All parties come with some big baggage, and who are the small parties, and then chose to make that political statement. So the non-vote, the abstention, many different things, but two most important is people do not care. They think they won't make a difference in their individual vote, or it is actually a political statement as well. There's no way, unfortunately, we can differentiate, but if there is a sharp increase in abstention, lowering of turnout, it will definitely be a political statement as well.
All right. I want to update viewers again as the results. The top three parties nationally so far: ANC sitting at 53% of the vote, the DA 27% of the vote, and the EFF at 7.8%. And voting districts completed 4,110. That's 17% of the voting districts. We can look at a few provinces now, because that's what we've got up on the screen, that we're able to look at the votes coming from the ROC, the Results Operations Centre. We've got on the screen Limpopo and Mpumalanga and the Northwest. So those two provinces, I talked to Limpopo and the Northwest, are predicted that the EFF would come in as the official opposition in those parties. So EFF sitting at 10,094 votes so far I think that's the Limpopo, and the Northwest at 24,764. Let's talk to the EFF and the DA. They're right next to one another. What are we making of this?
And yes, very interesting in these early results. The EFF is eclipsing the DA at province level in several cases, and that will be a serious change in that political landscape. Interesting, 10 years ago now, when COPE emerged as the official opposition in several other provinces. They had eclipsed previously dominant opposition parties, and then just faded, and it seems now, and then the DA moved in more, and EFF quite strong already last time around in Limpopo, but this time around EFF could be surpassing the DA in several other provinces. It's interesting too that I think there is a bit of an urban bias in the results that are released so far. That is a typical pattern we see at election time in results coming through. Easier centres, but urban excluding metros. Metros notoriously come in last, but that means the EFF in the national stakes could still be moving up, because they have more of a, except in Limpopo, and they say they're coming through in Mpumalanga, etc. as well. But that also will explain the DA, I think, at this stage, relatively good, well positioned in relation to the ANC. But the ANC vote is very rural. South Africa is urbanizing well into the 60 towards 70% of South Africans are urbanized by now, but the ANC rural vote often takes a longer time to come in as well, and that could very well still reposition the ANC in a stronger position in relation to the DA.
You're talking about urban areas. I want to move. It's not necessarily on that screen, but here, let's look to Gauteng, because we haven't spoken about Gauteng yet. Quite an interesting one here, but 10% of the voting districts have been declared, and this is what I've got in front of me. ANC has got 53% of the vote, the DA 25% of the vote, and the EFF 13.6% of the vote in Gauteng. There is a massive race for Gauteng.
It is fascinating at the early level. We become more certain of the trends when 10% of the total vote number is declared. Not yet. So far it's voting districts.
It's only 10% of voting districts.
It's still very tentative, but very interesting that the ANC is hanging on then by your percentage, early percentages there, by 52%. And outright majority, yes, that is what many of us had felt based on some polls and some political instincts, that that could be the case, that the ANC narrowly hangs on to Gauteng. They would be very relieved. But simultaneously, what a result like that would spell for the next elections 5 years down the line. And if the trend continues, then that would be the point where the real coalition stage of government comes in, if it is avoided in a core province like Gauteng at this stage.
Yeah, I mean, this one is going to be very... Susan, yes? Did you spot something there that you wanted to talk to?
I was looking at people who are really punting the Socialist Revolutionary Workers' Party. They're getting smattering of votes here and there, not that well. And the UDM actually doing quite poorly as well. Depending on how that translates into the national vote, the UDM at this stage looks like they could also be out of parliament.
What would happen? I mean, what would happen to somebody like Bantu Holomisa? Bantu Holomisa has got he's got a history of politics, and then suddenly to see his party not make it, and then again we're making assumptions here, it very well may go in, because his stronghold is more along the lines of the Eastern Cape than the provinces that we have on the screen right now. But I mean, you know, what becomes of a party political leader like that?
He could be a major target for recruit by other political parties.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, he did say in the last few weeks on several occasions, if the ANC needs a coalition partner, the UDM may be talking to them. So maybe there is some affinity there, maybe there is some forgiveness now that the ANC is more open and tries to root out corruption, at least by some serious signals like commissions of inquiries and some top-level appointments. And it was on allegations, if not proven allegations in some respect, of corruption early days in ANC in the 1990s, that Bantu Holomisa had left ANC. So maybe he sees a way going back into the ANC. Maybe he has business, like most politicians have some business interests that could preoccupy him, but he is a political animal. I think he would like to find some political role.
Yeah, it would be good. So if we look to a national vote, and that is of course what we had spoken to a lot earlier, we're still looking at that constantly, but we were talking to who the top 7 parties are going to be now in South Africa from what we've seen here, and the CSI are saying that that list is going to comprise of ANC at the top, DA, EFF, Freedom Front Plus, IFP, ACDP, and then Good. That's what they're predicting as the top 7. According to the results now, looking at how those parties are performing, that's exactly how it's standing. The UDM coming below Good.
And Good moving in over those previous small ones. Freedom Front strengthening, IFP, interesting, hanging on to that 4th position, ACDP still in there. And so yes, that was some of our predictions too at ACP, given that base, and as they've got an easy following relatively, people over the years have stayed with them, that they remain in parliament. And
we've got the BLF there, 1,227 votes. The BLF made a very, very big noise in the run-up to these elections. I mean, they, you know, people sort of wanting to see whether or not they're actually going to get a seat in Parliament. Again, early to tell, but
so far not.
1,227. Let's perhaps talk to viewers. How many votes do you need to actually secure? I know it's all dependent on the turnout.
Exactly. It's somewhere between 47,000 and 48,000. We know the previous election it was 46,000. And there's roughly been a 2,000 per election increase in that number, but if the turnout is on a lower end, it seems like that, it could well be that it's around 47,000 votes that are needed. And those parties, yes, even on 10% of voting districts declared, they are sitting quite far off. And I find it quite amusing that the BLF if things like these can be amusing, not that the South African Capitalist Party at this stage is faring better than the BLF.
Okay, but again, we'll have to keep watching that because we're not sure. As you mentioned, you've seen the voting districts that have been declared, some of them, and there'd be more being in the urban areas and those fast to report.
Definitely.
So we'll see on that one. We haven't spoken to the Western Cape because the Western Cape is very interesting. I don't know if we can get a shot of the Western Cape and how things are faring there. So there is a prediction coming from the CSIR saying that the ANC could see a 5% gain from voters in the Western Cape. Good, obviously making massive inroads there, and the DA dipping slightly. But your predictions on the Western Cape?
You know, I would not be surprised if the DA does hang on there with an outright majority. I think the campaign spoke to that, and the ANC, yes, they put in a big campaign, and the campaign has really extended way beyond just the campaign period. It's been going back for years now, because the ANC knew from the previous elections they could have done better in the previous elections in the Western Cape had they actually registered their own supporters and had they mobilized them to go out and vote. And they had been working on this seriously in the last election.
There's a look of it. So we had 134,000 going to the ANC, 299,000 for Cope, and 17,991 with Good. I'm just looking at the big ones, and the Freedom Front plus 10,000 there, ACDP 13,000. This is after, I think, almost 37% of the voting districts declared in the Western Cape.
Yes, and that shows the DA is there on the 22,000, and they are coming through with a very strong and much stronger than the other parties, including the ANC. At the stage, the Western Cape, apart from Cape Town itself, is usually one of the areas that can't fast and get pretty early, high proportion of early declaration of results. So the Western Cape picture could very well be taking shape at this stage, but it's interesting if Good is faring well, even if most of the Cape Town areas are unlikely to be in at this stage. So they could still inch up a little bit, but yes, interesting Good party with Patricia de Lille. We know her previous Independent Democrats, when they were launched with big fanfare, they did very well, and then also not very well, but in terms of small opposition party performances, relatively well, and then they faded. So one would be interested to see whether Good has better fortunes.
Indeed. Well, that's the picture for the Western Cape, but let's get you up to speed with some news stories as well. Susan, I know you're going to stay with us throughout this segment of the broadcast, as well as crossing over to the Rock, where Sakina is standing by. She's also going to give us an update, and she's also got an analyst there with her. But let's bring you up to speed with the news. Just gone 7 o'clock.